ran rounds. This was planned to create an opportunity for all individuals across, if you would, UAB Medicine and the School of Medicine to have a chance to basically both gather together around a topic and to have both discussion, but also national renowned presenters give information on critical areas that really affect all of us. And this topic today really fits that bill well. The topic about wellness and resilience is something that affects everyone from our staff to our physicians to all of our providers, and certainly affects our patients as well. We're fortunate today, although we are not going very far by Zoom, but we have someone who is familiar with UAB in Birmingham and Alabama, Dr. Lauren Whitt, and in fact is one of our very own in every aspect of the word, both being a native Alabamian, but also having been a leader at UAB before moving to her new opportunity. Lauren is now head of global resilience at Google, and she today will talk about cultivating resilience. I think there's probably no better time for us to actually delve into this topic after we've come through 2020 and are still living out the challenges of the pandemic in 2021. We've seen a significant impact of resilience and grit and fortitude by our healthcare providers and by our patients who've struggled to get over this disease, and those who've won, and unfortunately some who've lost. So it's important today that we think about our own well-being so that we can continue to deliver the care and the concern and the medicine that our community, our patients, and the world needs. With that said, I'll turn over the floor to Alicia Jones, our Vice President and UAB Chief Human Resource Officer, who will introduce our guest.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Vickers. And again, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the opportunity so much to introduce Dr. Lauren Whitt. As Dr. Vickers stated, Lauren is the head of global resilience at Google. And this is a topic that's not new to Lauren, definitely. Not only did she do her dissertation on the topic, but as a college athlete, I'm sure she learned a little bit about resilience firsthand. She was a soccer player. As stated, she is a Birmingham native. And prior to joining Google 7 years ago, she was our first UAB wellness director. Any of us who had to make hiring decisions, you know when you have a great one. I got a couple of calls where people knew I was in the market for wellness director and told me about Lauren. And I remember meeting her during a Christmas break. We had lunch at Brio's down at in Brookwood Village. And I remember in just a very few minutes recognizing everything I heard was exactly even more than I thought. So she was absolutely great. She came in and set the foundation for the UAB wellness program that still exists today. We're still building on that great work. The other thing I remember so much about Lauren when she worked with me is she would constantly come into my office and just be over the moon regarding the collaborations that existed here at UAB. There's so much that's going on, and there was never a time that she asked for help or wanted to work with someone where that wasn't available to her. So as we kind of move into Lauren's talk today, I'm glad to say that eagerness to work together and collaboration still exists. And it is my pleasure to welcome Lauren back home to UAB as she talks to us about resilience today. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, Alicia. I'm happy to be here with you all. I am the world is virtual at this point, and so I'm actually calling in from the beautiful Emerald Coast on the beach where I live, because Google is work from home, work from anywhere at this point. But the main thing about that is, how do we navigate these unusual situations? We have choices, we have opportunities, and we have to remember where and how we navigate those opportunities. And so, brief story for me, I went from Alabama to California. I lived in the Silicon Valley for a little while, I then made my trip over to Boulder, Colorado with our Google office there. Lastly, was in our Google Atlanta office prior to the work from anywhere space. And so I've sort of found my way to the beautiful beach. But the fun part about work from anywhere is that there are no defined timelines during the day. It is normal for me to wake up and have meetings at 4, 5, 6 a.m. with our teams in London and Dublin, and then end the day with meetings with our team late at night in Singapore or Sydney or Taiwan. So we really have this global scope to my role, which for me brings forth the opportunity to be able to help. How do we cultivate resilience? And so today we're going to talk about that. And so hopefully you can see the slides here on your screens as we sort of dive into this. And the first thing that I really want to be able to dive into is like, what are we talking about when we talk about cultivating resilience? What does this mean? So let me give you a definition here. On the next slide, you'll be able to see there are decades of research on resilience, decades. At Google, we find that it's important for us to be able to navigate similar conversations so that we all have a shared common language. A shared common language. So for the sake of today, everything that we talk about when it comes to resilience, I want you to have the frame of mind that it is your ability to respond to and recover from stress. So you've often heard resilience talked about is your ability to bounce back, your ability to rebound, move forward after you shouldn't technically be able to move forward because of situations or circumstances. For Googlers, for all of you, Googlers is what we call Google employees, by the way. We also have Nooglers who are new Googlers. We have Spooglers who are spouses of Googlers. We have Dooglers, which are, yes, you're right, dogs of Googlers. And so as you think through this lens, I want you to think through Googlers are just like you. They're operating at the edge of their existence. They have high responsibility. There are high consequences. Maybe not in the life and death situation that some of you are dealing with, but in the ability that we are able to navigate a global audience. The ability to respond and recover from stress is critical. And so let me just sort of set the groundwork for you in a model and a resilience framework that I want to use. And then we'll move into how to tactically talk about it, how to put it into existence for you. So there's a researcher by the name of Richardson. You'll be able to see the beginning of his model here. And Richardson is kind of entertaining, actually, because I used his research in my dissertation a million years ago. And then all of a sudden, you have the opportunity to dive into the topic and call these folks that you used to write about and cite and discuss. And so I called him and we talked through this. What does resilience look like today? What does resilience look like during these COVID times? And so I want to use his model to sort of explain that. And so as you see here, you see sort of our personality, our skills, our community. These are our protective factors. And then we have on the other side, our stressors, adversity, and life events. We're good. Life is good when we're balanced in these two places. But what happens when there's a boom? This is when there are stressors that outweigh the protective factors that you have. You are overwhelmed with the stressors that you don't have the protective factors to fascinate and balance to. So as we move forward out of this boom and out of this disruption, we begin to reintegrate. Many of you are in a reintegration phase now. Maybe you're returning back to offices. Maybe the chaos or the crisis feeling or protocols you had in place are returning to a more normal state. For us at Google, we're looking at this globally. We have employees in India, in Brazil, in places that we are still struggling to rebound. We also have folks here in the US who are back in the office, back to their routines. And so we all reintegrate at a different pace. But as we look at this reintegration, the thing about resilience is where we go from here. We have the ability to reintegrate with resilience. We also have this dysfunctional reintegration. And it's important to realize that there are actions you can take to help you reintegrate in the places that you want to be able to reintegrate. The final vision here is simply that we want you to be able to thrive. When we want you to thrive, we want you to come out of crisis or a moment of stress thriving instead of feeling like, if I can just survive this. And when I talk about just surviving, especially during COVID times, some of you are surviving the disease, the crisis of those things. Others of you feel like, I just have to survive today. I just have to survive this week. And so there are macro and micro levels that we're talking about surviving and thriving. And so as we look at this, I want you to know the protective factors is the key. It goes back to that first box. And so I want to leave you with sort of one thought here on our next slide around the discussion on this, is that resilience is a skill. It can be built, it can be practiced, it can be cultivated by our attitudes and our behaviors. When we talk about this, we think routine. We think every single day, what are my consistent routines? What are my habits? Not just around the physical actions, but around the mental actions. And you'll hear me talk about this a lot, how important the mental skills and the mental focus is during this process of cultivating resilience. The final thing I'll just say is that in our own research, I can't put it on a slide for you because we don't share data very often outside of Google, but our research is showing very specifically, intentionally, that Googlers and others who are focusing on cultivating resilience, they are diligent in building, maintaining, and possessing those resilient skills. They have lower rates of burnout consistently over and over and over. So if you're one of those individuals who's sitting there feeling like you're just surviving, you feel like you are just trying to get to the next thing, I want to give you some tips and some tools today that I'm hopeful will help you move just a little bit closer to where you're going. And where are we going? We're going to a place of meeting the moment. And what I love about this campaign, we started this at Google. When we looked at this, we said, how during the process of COVID, how do we look and navigate different moments? I'm in a different moment than each of you. Each of you are in a different moment than somebody standing beside you, sitting beside you, or in a room across the hall from you. We are all meeting our different moments. Some as parents and caregivers, some are trying to meet a moment of needing and desiring rest and recovery. Some of you are meeting a moment of navigating working from home or returning to the office or continuing to work in an environment that has new protocols. Some of you are nervous about going back. Some of you have no intention or desire to go back. Some of we just want life to be normal again. These are all different moments. And so we launched a project and a program called Meet the Moment. And the fun part about this for me is that I'm going to walk through a couple examples for you. And the project started with 9 sports psychologists and clinical psychologists around the globe. I now have a team of about 32 sports psych and clinical psych folks that are working with elite athletes, professional athletes, and the Olympic athletes. So excited about the work they're doing with these folks, preparing them for the Olympics this summer. But they came together to help advise and create and build with me a program of meeting the moment. Today, we're going to talk about 4 different areas. We're going to talk about how to zoom in and zoom out. So I want you to remember the image of a camera. We're going to talk about a hiker and how we look at our 3-foot world and what's around us, the tools that we have. We're also going to talk about a pit stop. If there are any NASCAR fans in the house, we will talk about a pit stop. And finally, we're going to talk about our cup of tea. Again, remember, as we go through this, we're framing resilience as your ability to respond and recover from stress. So let's talk about the first one. How do we zoom in and zoom out? How do I balance the competing priorities in my life? Have you been in this spot, especially during COVID, but also just every day? I have home, I have work, I have family, I have friends, I have personal, just need to step away. I need to grow, I need to engage, I need to recover. There are children, there are pets, there are plants, especially if you're still working from home, you have competing priorities around your attention. Oftentimes we look at that pile of laundry in the corner and think, I should go do that, but I really need to do this or this or this. We have these competing priorities. And what I want you to remember is that resilience is dynamic. It is not stagnant. So independent of how you feel in this moment, there are practical actions you can take, like reframing your thinking, like zooming in and zooming out by focusing your attention on one small task, but also being able to step back and to look at the broader task. And so I want to ask you these 2 questions. If you have a sticky note nearby, or you have a pen and paper, or even if you're taking notes on your phone, I want to give you a couple of questions as we bounce through this. And as we think through these yellow questions, they'll be yellow on every slide. If you're in a situation where you cannot see color or you can't navigate the color on your screens, they're going to be on the right side. If you're looking at the screen, my right side, there are going to be those 2 questions on the sidebar there to be able to ask, where should you be zooming in? And where should you be zooming out? When you think about today, just think about today. What are the most important things that you must accomplish today? What are those? all the rest should fall apart. Everything else should fall away. Where are the things if you zoom out, take a step back from the calendar. I will do it physically oftentimes just to have that physical action of I'm removing myself from the situation. I'm going to step back. I'm going to zoom out. What is happening on my calendar this week, this month, this quarter? Where are the competing priorities and what is most important now? We're always asking that question, what's important now? So I want you to remember, again, the image of the camera. Do you see the camera? Focus on the camera. Do you see the camera? Yes. See that camera and think through, what are the moments in my life that I need to zoom in? And what are the moments of my life that I need to zoom out? And that is where you will find what your true priorities are and how we let the rest fall away. Another visual that I'd like to give you is this one of a hiker. I don't know if there are any hikers in Birmingham, Alabama. I know there are some places you can hike nearby in the trails and whatnot. I spent a lot of time in California and in Colorado hiking, and this is such hiking and climbing and mountaineering and all of these fun things, which some of you who know me will know that I'm all about the adventure and ready to go at any moment in time. And there's a story of a man named Owen, and he was out there climbing. He's one of the best in the world. And he reached a point on the side of a mountain where he had run out of cams. And the cams are the hooks that sort of like keep you anchored and safe in place. And as he realizes that, where do you go next when you run out of what you believe is your only safety device? Where do you go? Where do you look for? And it's the ability to detach from the moment and to be able to look around in your 3-foot world, to be able to step away from detach from the moment in your mind, to be able to reframe the situation. For Owen, his coach came up behind him. He said, don't look at me. Don't look down. Don't panic. Don't look inside of yourself at the fears and the panic that's inside of you. Look at your 3-foot world. What is in your 3-foot world that you can use to be more successful? What is in your 3-foot world that you can impact, you can influence, and that you can dictate or drive the outcome of? In our lives every day, we need to realize that resilience is cultivated by design, not by default. We don't just default into being resilient. We do it with very intentional mindsets. So I'll ask you this question. If you're concerned about something that's happening, how can you detach from the situation and in your own moment ask, if blank happens, great fear, great success, momentary decision-making, if this, then I will do that. Right now we live in a world that is uncertain, but there are many certainties in the uncertainty. And I sort of snicker when I say that because there's so much about this time that is uncertain, difficult to navigate, blurry, fuzzy, just unknown. I'll just go back to that word unknown. But there's so much certainty in what is your job today? What matters to you? What is your purpose? What is your mission? What is that vision driving your life? We know who we are, what we want to do, and what we're called to do in most situations and cases. The question is, how can you prepare your mind in resilient moments of high stress to be able to say, if this happens, then I can respond this way. If I run out of cams on the side of a mountain, then I can do A, B, and C. If I am in this difficult situation, if I panic or have challenging emotions returning to the office, then I can do this to calm myself. I can take deep breaths. I can take a mask break and step outside. I can fill in the blank. And I don't know those if moments for you, and I don't know your then solutions, but I do know that there are tools within your 3-foot world that you can be using more often. And on the same point of our 3-foot world, I want you to think about a baseball batter. If you watch baseball, we worked with a lot of sports psychologists that work in Major League Baseball. A couple of them were in the World Series last year, and they keep reminding me over and over and over that at the highest level of sport during the World Series, what does every single batter do every time between pitches? They step out of the box physically. They readjust whatever they need to readjust, and then they step back into the batter's box, focus solely on that one baseball that is coming in their direction. And so I would challenge you to think about that 3-foot world in the visual of a baseball batter's box as well. To be able to say, are there moments in your life you just need to step away, detach yourself from the moment so that you can re-enter your 3-foot world with focus and intentionality. Sometimes we need to detach though. Sometimes we just need rest and recovery, right? Some of you nodding, I'm certain you're kind of feeling that. You're just like, oh, I'm exhausted. But how do you know when to detach? Most of us get caught in the rhythm of, I will take a vacation next month or in 2 quarters, or I will take a vacation next year when this is all over and the world has returned to normal. I will wait until I can travel without a mask, and then my family will go on vacation. Then I will take a break. But the reality is that that doesn't work because we are exhausted. Resilience prioritizes rest and recovery, not endurance and grit. I'm going to say that again because I know the world that you all work in healthcare. You are caretakers. You want to endure. You want to survive it for them. You want to continue to go beyond the boundaries that you know possible in order for you to support, care, and save. There are also these moments where resilience prioritizes rest and recovery, not endurance. We have to find those moments. And so if there are any NASCAR fans in the house, you may or may not know, for others of you, they go around in circles a gazillion times over and over and over, but there are regular pre-scheduled pit stops. And during a pit stop, in about a split second, it feels like they have checked the tires. There's a team of people, right? A team of people. They have checked the tires, the gasoline, any of the mechanics of the engine, any of the mechanics of what's happening. They check on the driver, and then they do what? They step back and allow the driver to continue in the race. When are your pit stops? When are you intentionally, as a high-performing machine, as a high-performing, high-functioning, elite person, somebody who is working at the edge, at the brink of pressure, of crisis, of difficult things every day, day in, day out, hour over hour over hour? When are your pre-scheduled pit stops? How can you look at your day and say, this is the moment that I will make sure that I am pausing? This is the moment where I want to intentionally build in rest and recovery. We know, for those of you that are looking at screens, for those of you that may be anchored to a desk more often than you are out and about in the real world, interacting with patients or other projects, we know that hours and hours on the screen creates the same exhaustion and fatigue of our minds as doing 100 up downs. Now, do you know what 100 up downs is? Do you remember this? I remember this. If we got in trouble in school, you'd have to stand up, drop hands on the knees, kick your feet up, kick your feet back up, and jump back up. Squat thrust is that part of it. Burpees now has a variety of names. But as you think through this, 90 minutes, research shows, 90 minutes of staring at a screen is as exhausting for you as doing 100 up downs or squat thrusts or burpees mentally. Now, what happens if we simply direct, I have another screen over here, if I take my eyes off of the screen, simply to look out the window for 90 seconds and then I come back? What happens when I take 5 minutes at the end of a work hour? If I have a meeting scheduled from 8 to 9 or 9 to 10, what happens if we cut the meeting early and we end 5 minutes before the end of the meeting so that I can prepare, regroup, and refocus for the next meeting ahead? We have to build in these pit stops. For some of you, you're working late at night, you're working weekends, and I understand that. I'm there. I understand that. I've been there. But we have to build in how we learn when we need to detach and ask those questions of yourself. When are you scheduling regular pit stops into your days and your weeks? One thing I learned at Google as soon as I got there is that we use Google Calendars, Gmail systems, Google Suites of Services, right? And so at Google, anyone, anytime can put a meeting on my calendar. They own my calendar. It's collaboration. We all share. So they can add meetings on my calendar. What are all these things? How is everybody adding time on here? And so you learn very quickly the things that are important for me, I have to put on my calendar. If it is not on my calendar, it does not happen. Many of you probably operate that way. When do you work out? When do you move? Sometimes it doesn't happen. Why? Because it's not on the calendar. You haven't noted it as a scheduled pit stop for yourself to check in on yourself. And my final comment around the pit stops is really looking at the fact that on that bottom image, if you're able to see it on your screens, there's a team of people that come around that vehicle. You all, many work in teams. It is critical for us as teams to ask and to check in on each other during those pit stops. And it's okay for you to use the common language as a team. Hey guys, we're going to take a pit stop at the beginning of this meeting. How are you? Are we doing okay? What's working? What's not working? What do we need to reset and reframe so we can move forward? So I'd encourage you to take this pit stop language, common language, back with you. And as we talk about check-ins, this is one of my favorite ones, is the tea check-in. We just call it, how's your tea? Where's your tea? How's your tea check-in going today? At Google, we have an entire list of things, and we'll share this out with you all afterwards if you're interested, so that you can sort of read through and know what this looks like. When we talk about our tea, it's our thoughts, our energy, and our attention. So if you're taking notes, write that down. If you're in a place where you're sitting by yourself and no one can hear you and you're on mute, be sure to repeat this after me so that you learn it and you hear it. My thoughts, my energy, and my attention. Our T check-in. These are the most important things that we can focus on that impact our performance and our relationships and our resilience and our opportunities. So I love to ask this question, like, how do I know what's important now? Alicia knows this from when I worked with her at UAB. I love to win. I want to win. Doesn't matter what the game is, doesn't matter what the activity is. I want to win. I want to compete, but mostly I want to win. And this works out so well because how do I win at life? How do I win this moment? What's important now? We ask this question over and over and over. What's important now? What's important now? What's important now? For some of you, what's important right now, it might be going to tend to that person or that plant or that pet that's in your space while you're working from home. And that's okay. For some of you, what's important now might be finishing that spreadsheet, finishing that project, saving that patient. What's important now, asking this question of ourselves over and over and over throughout the day helps us align our priorities. What's important in this moment? Right now, what's the most important thing that I need to do? Let me do that and then move on. It is critical to recognize that sometimes what's important now is dinner with your family. Sometimes what's most important right now is a walk with your family or your significant other. Sometimes what's important now is that you take a nap and you reset your energy. And so ask this question, what's important now? If you want to, in a team setting, managers, leaders, directors, this is critical for your one-on-one. We have at Google, we have one-on-one well-being check-ins all the time. And sometimes we don't want to talk about our emotions and our feelings. It is Mental Health Month, and that's okay. We still don't sometimes want to talk about all those things in the confines of the business, but we can ask about our tea. And it takes some of the emotional pieces out of it if that's something that's of interest to you. How's your tea? How are your thoughts? Now, for a manager to be asking somebody, or for a team leader or project lead, where's my thoughts? Today, I'm distracted. I'm frustrated. I am like fully tuned in and ready to go. We're going to walk through each of these as we go through this. So they ask the question, today my mind is, what is my mind? My mind is, I'm focused. I'm not focused. As a team, what do we need to do to help refocus our thoughts? Is there confusion about priorities? Is there confusion around the project or the expectation? My thoughts are on point. I'm ready to go. Great. How can I get out of your way so that you can run? Our energy. Today, my energy is, how am I feeling? I'm excited. I'm ready to go. Give me hard things. I'm ready to do this. My energy is a little low. I just need to step outside and go for a walk around the building to just sort of reset where I am. And as soon as I come back in, I'm ready to run. We have to manage and maintain our energy. Our energy is our greatest resource. And we need that energy to be able to fuel our passions, our dreams, our ideas, our innovations. And if we don't recognize and ask ourselves, am I tired? Am I too tired to think through this thing? Am I too exhausted? I need to learn how to check in on the pit stop to know my energy, but also to know what fuels it and what helps me re-energize. Around the energy game, one just visual I'll give you a little bit. If you don't know by now, I love visuals. We've sort of talked about those and we'll revisit those at the end. But when you think about your energy, I want you to think about a fountain and I want you to think about a drain. And you're on campus at UAB or have been, so you're familiar with some of the fountains and the beautiful water that is there. There are people in our lives that give us that explosion of excitement and energy and fuel and passion. And you know these people because you want to be in the room with them. You want to be near them. You want to take on projects that make you feel as refreshed as you are when you see the fountains around town. But there are also projects and people and roles those are drains, and they drain our energy and they drain the things out of us. And it's so important that we recognize how many of the drains am I investing in? Whether they're projects or people or experiences or moments, we need to be aware of every time I do this thing or spend time with these people or skip doing my workout or walk or something that's important to me. It's so critical to know what are my drains and what are my fountains. Sometimes it's a nap is a fountain, and that's wonderful. Sometimes it's a walk outside. Sometimes it's people. Sometimes it's calling somebody around. Sometimes going for a walk with somebody. Resilience rests on the shoulders of relationships. We need our communities. We need our people around us in order to help us know what's important. And then finally, our attention. In order to be my best, today I will focus on A, B, or C. Now, I love the analogy A, B, or C because we use that offhanded, right? Like we use that all the time. Like, I'm going to do A, B, and C. I'm going to do X, Y, Z. You'll notice those are in threes. Our catchphrase is in threes. Most often, we need to have 3 important things that we're going to focus on doing, not 20. And if we work through those 3, then we can add new 3 ones. But today, to be my best, I'm going to focus on doing or being these 1, 2, or 3 things. And once I've accomplished that, then I will look, now what's important? What are the next things that I need to do? Because resilience rests on the shoulders of relationships. And when we think about resilience, what I love about the concept is that we are facing these moments all day, every day. If you think of it almost as if it's like a map, just sort of like a maturity map, right? Like when we're babies, when we're children, we learn how to sit up, and then we learn how to crawl, and then we learn how to walk and to run and to jump and to sprint and to do crazy, amazing, athletic and wonderful physical things. When we talk about resilience, we have to learn how to sit up first. And the first thing about sitting up is checking in on self-reflection. So the first skill that you need to learn is the self-check-in, the T check-in. How are my thoughts? Where is my energy? And where should my attention be? And then we sort of began to move to the other skills we've talked about, right? Which are a lot more fun and a little bit more fiery when we think about the lens of a camera. So the lens of a camera, right? You remember that one from the previous slide. The camera lens is really thinking through where do I need to zoom in and where I need to zoom out. This is sort of learning how to crawl. Where do I zoom in and zoom out? And the next step is really beginning to walk. And it's like, where's my 3-foot world? Like, where can I move my 3-foot world to pick up new tools, new skills, new opportunities? And then again, we begin to sprint and begin to move forward. And as we look at this, we become race cars. We need that pit stop. We need to check in on all of the things about our life, the people, the places, the projects, our energy, our thoughts, our attention. We need to know these so that we can not just know, but know this is what I need to do in order to prioritize my thoughts back to where they are. This is what is essential for me to be able to invest in my rest and recovery so that I can resiliently respond to what's happening. And then finally, the attention. How do I stay focused on the important things at the important times? And if you know me well, you've heard me often say, do the next right thing at the right time for the right reason. And this is how we navigate those resilience, the resilience in our lives, in our daily moments. What's the right thing right now? And is this the right time to take it on? And so I want to sort of close with one other slide for you here today. And this is an analogy that I love here, really specifically thinking through, you're exhausted. Some of you, Some of you are excited. Some of you are doing well. Some of you are fired up right now and you're ready to run and jump and play and go take these things on and look at your calendars. But some of you are tired and think, gosh, this just sounds like a lot of work to be resilient. Like it just sounds heavy and it sounds hard. And you're telling me I've got to sit up and then crawl and then walk and then run. And like, this sounds like a forever process. It is a forever process. But what we also know is that if a flower doesn't bloom, we don't blame the flower, right? We don't blame the flower for not blooming. We examine the environment that we're asking the flower to bloom in. Intentional pause. I want you to hear that. I want you to reflect on that. If a flower doesn't bloom, we don't blame the flower. We examine the environment that we're asking the flower to bloom. And so when you think through this question, I want you to think about your life right now. Think through your day, think through your morning, think through your afternoon. What are the pieces of your environment that you can change? You have more power than you think. For me, remember early on in the beginning of this conversation, I said I had replanted myself on the beach during this work from anywhere time, because this is where when I'm working, often sporadically, but around the clock, I have the ability to get outside and be in nature because that's important to me. And I'll tell you, many of you are in these situations as well. We've been running my team 24/7 since a year and a half ago when this thing started, because we are and have been responsible for all of the mental health of our 160,000 plus global employees around the globe. We work with and partner with them in their situations and what's happening with teams, with product areas, with Google clients at times. So the demand has been very high. And it's been very important for our team to recognize where's the environment that you're working in and you're living in. For many of you, I realize, you cannot all move to the beach, which I apologize for because it's wonderful here on the sandy beaches. But also, I want you to think about the environment that you're building your office in. Some of you are beginning this, what we're calling the resilient return. This resilient return back to our next normal. What is the normal going to be like in the future? We don't know. But as we begin to navigate back to our next normal, I want to encourage you to think about that environment. So if you're back in the office for the first time today in a while, look at your desk setting, look at your setup. Do you have what you need? Are your laptops and computers and monitors at eye level? Is this an optimal place for you to be able to perform? Also, if you're at home or working back and forth, the way you have everything around you set up is important. If you're managers and leaders, you have set and created a culture amongst your team. It happens by design, not by default, right? So you made choices one way or another, good or bad, don't know, it changes from team to team, but you made intentional choices around the culture and the pace of your team. You set that environment. Is that the environment that you want your people to grow in and to flourish in and to bloom, if you will, in? But as individuals, I want you to remember is that you have more power and ability than you think. Do you remember how do we grow flowers? We give them light, we give them oxygen, we give them water. There are probably many of you who are way better at growing flowers and know more about the process of growing flowers than I do. And you will have a million layers into this. But oftentimes it's the amount of water that we give them. Are you around the fountains in your life often enough? Are you investing in the fountains in your life, whether they are people or projects or activities or things at work or things in personal life? They interact and influence our ability to grow. So think about your environment. And as we close today, I just want to sort of leave you with, again, this one thing is that resilience rests on the shoulders of relationships. If the flower doesn't bloom, we don't blame the flower. We examine the environment. We examine the relationships around us and our relationship with the world around us. If you're working in a team, work in a team. Use the T check-in to check in on each other. It doesn't have to be too personal because this is a work setting, and that is so important to be able to recognize. The CEO recently came out in a Business Insider and said, "We are not your family. We are committed to growing this company." And it's so important to remember that, is that share what you're comfortable with sharing, but also check in, encourage each other to invest in your cultivating resilience. Do you remember how we do that? We do that by zooming in and zooming out. This is a simple activity to be able to shift and change our focus. We do this by looking in the 3-foot world around us, step into and out of that batter's box. Look at what those things and those spaces are around you. And then also, as we finally, again, the pit stop is so critical for you to be able to invest in rest and recovery more so than endurance and grit. I am honored to be with you all today. It is so fun to come back and to be able to share and to be able to speak with the UAB audience again. I believe there's some time for questions. I understand there's a way you can still submit questions if you have them. I'm happy to answer as many questions as I can about Google or resilience or the topics that we just talked about. So please feel free to chime in. And with that, I will toss it back to the meeting leads.
Hi, Lauren, I'm just going to jump in here and say, I remember when you told me you were going to Google, and I thought, what are you going to do out there with all these healthy people who, aren't trying to get exercise and eat healthy and all the things we were working on here. And I'm just so proud to see all the work that you've done and the big difference that you're making. And thank you again for bringing that back to us here at UAB in a time where it's needed so desperately.
Lauren, I thank you too. It was a great presentation, engaging, and as you promised, you would really walk us through some opportunity, but challenges as well. I took a lot of notes. I think you had a lot of practical suggestions, obviously honed through experience and through some research, which is quite important and really credible to apply these things to our daily lives. So thank you again for taking time to do this. We may not have had you without Zoom, but I'm glad that we could take advantage of it. I know you have a busy week ahead of you as well. I'll turn things back over to Kathy Ratcliffe on our School of Medicine presentation team and Nisha Patel, our Director of Wellness, and who works with David Rogers, our Chief Wellness Officer, to facilitate Q&A around your presentation on resilience and wellness.
Thank you, Dr. Vickers, and thank you, Lauren. That was awesome. We're getting a few questions in the chat, and we do have some that were submitted before, so I'll go ahead and start with those. What does it look like for an organization to prioritize resilience as Google has? Can you maybe give some practical examples?
Sure. What does it look like to prioritize resilience into Google? We are viewing it as a capability. So these principles, these behaviors, they are norms and expectations of managers, of leaders, of teams. They're being integrated into the fabric of our expectation setting. We have a variety of tools and resources to be able to encourage folks and be able to challenge them to set team norms with their groups. At Google, what does that look like? Again, we use Google Suite products, so we have ping functionality. So just for one example, a team may set a team norm that I will ping you if it's a quick question, but I will email you if it's something that's going to take additional time. I'm not going to interrupt your flow or your deep work time. We look at calendars across Google and we prioritize, encourage people to block time for what we call deep thinking work, which is important, right? Because oftentimes we get paid to do a project or a job, something specific, and we end up spending all day in meetings that have nothing to do with the actual thing that we're hired to do. And then we spend our nights and our weekends doing the work that is specific to our skill set that we actually were hired to do. And so by creating these blocks of time, you'll see them all over Google calendars. They might be deep thinking, they may be project time, they may be do not schedule work time, focused working time. So you see it from the practical on our calendaring and how we spend our time. You also see it integrated into the expectations and the fabric of managers should and need to be executing on T check-ins. They need to be asking about well-being and those sorts of activities as well. Thanks for the question.
All right. What are some ways to handle long-term resilience in an unsupportive or bad environment?
It's a great question because you can't change the environment necessarily in that situation. My first advice would be one, evaluate the situation. Surprisingly, we often have choices. Now, if we're in a role that is our dream job and it's just not our dream team, does that role exist somewhere else on somebody else's team within the organization? When we think through that, we often, I'll sort of use this analogy oftentimes, is that a baseball player can step into that batter's box and he can stay in that batter's box pitch after pitch after pitch. But what happens? Exhaustion, mental fatigue. Now, the batter has the opportunity to step out, change teams, move things around, experiment, move around. And so it, for us, is really critical for our roles to be able to think of ourselves as autonomous in our decision making. So by being autonomous in our decision making, it means that you prioritize, this is what I value, this is my purpose, and this is where I'm thriving. Potentially, there are opportunities for many of us where we find ourselves in a situation where we bump up against all of the hard things, but we refuse to look and just say, is there a better place that I need to be? Now, Google, like many of you, we want to maintain and retain our brilliant people. And so we often will encourage folks as a team to have candid conversations. So at Google, we talk about it as psychological safety, and we have some tools and some tips, Cappy, that I'm happy to share if you guys want to send them out. We talk about unconscious bias. And why is it not working? Is it because we have biases against each other that we don't recognize that we're bumping up against, and we're just not seeing the world from the same place? And we have some trainings I'm happy to share over the Republic around that. And then we also have this psychological safety. Do I have an environment where I can talk freely and safely about the things that are happening? If that is the case, then yes, speak freely about them. And if that's not the case, then potentially check out other avenues at UAB to highlight or intentionally call out, this is potentially an unhealthy situation. And I know there are a lot of resources at UAB to be able to help sort of navigate those conversations. The final piece on this one, Cappy, and question asker, is to remember that when we think about resilience, it's going to help us respond and recover from stress. It won't solve the whole. It will help us operate and navigate within these hard situations. Sometimes we need more help than resilience can give. And I believe each of us should recognize and accept that it is Mental Health Month, and there are mental health resources that are available in many places. There are avenues to speak through specific situations to be able to navigate, how am I responding to this situation? How am I prompting this situation to be better or to be worse? And therapy and counseling can give each of us individual skills. And I would think of it less of like, I need mental therapy, but I need a new tools to handle this situation. And these are people that can give us and equip us with these new tools specific to that situation. So I know UAB has an employee assistance program and a variety of other tools that might be helpful in that case as well.
Excellent. Okay, there were actually several questions about that, so that's good. One question just came through, said, do you think these same concepts can apply to helping patients and staff who have faced more historical stress or trauma? Maybe in regard to what our institution could zoom in on and help with.
Yes, I do. I think there are a variety of ways to be able to help patients and to help those who have gone through these chronic and difficult and quite challenging situations. I think there is, it's fascinating, right? Because how do you know that you know something? Like, at what point do you really like, oh, I know this, I know about this? It is always in the reteaching of others. It is when you are confident enough and clear enough in what you know, what you believe, what you do, to then be able to teach and to reteach these things. And so for those of you who are working with patients, invest in learning and creating these routines and these habits and these mental disciplines for yourself, and then teach them and share them one-on-one in these situations. I think one skill that I would focus on is breathing. You would be surprised, actually, because many of you are sitting there like, I'm breathing, I know how to breathe, but can you take a deep breath? Like, when's the last time you took a deep breath, that you noticed your breath? This makes a big difference, especially in moments of anxiety or panic or feelings of being overwhelmed. And just teaching a patient or someone navigating a hard thing to take a very deep breath and then refocus on what's happening. Another way is to think through reframing our thinking. So we didn't dive into this today, but I'm going to just touch on it briefly. But there's a few thinking traps that we call them. And sometimes we overgeneralize it. So you may hear a patient overgeneralize, every time I come into the hospital, this is what happens, or every time that happens, or it's always, and you'll hear overgeneralizations in always and every time. And these are moments to just sort of come back and say, well, if that happens, then what can you do? And to bring it back very, very practically to, I hear you, validating, I hear your trouble. If this, then what? If this is the worst possible scenario, then how can we navigate it? What can we look at? And then also, I mean, I'm just going to say it, like, ask the patient to look at their 3-foot world. Who are the people in their phone, typically within 3 feet of them, who might be able to help support them, who might be able to provide help? What in that 3-foot world is there an opportunity for them to invite people into it, or to push people out of it, or to be able to find new resources? And so I would recommend those, especially when you hear those trigger words of I always, I never, every time. Sort of default back to reframing of, if this, then what? How can we handle that? And then, are there new tools or resources that we can bring into your 3-foot world? Hopefully that's helpful. I think in that question too, you sort of mentioned the zoom in, zoom out. And so I think there are moments, and just transparently with this audience, my father's a patient at your hospital. He has Parkinson's, and dementia is a sidebar of that. And so for us, we're constantly looking at, we're in this moment with you of, okay, in this moment, we're just going to take these 2 steps and move from this chair to that chair, and nothing else in the world. When we ask what's important now, the only thing that matters right now is helping him be present to take those steps from this chair to that chair. Phones are ringing, things are pinging, doesn't matter. This is all we do. And then when he gets to that other chair, he's got his remote control or his iPad to watch his music. And it's like, okay, now I can go and refocus on these other things. And so helping both patients and caretakers realize those small steps, be present in those small steps, and ask yourself, what's important now for this patient? Or teach the patient and their caregivers to ask that question themselves, what's important right now? And we're going to focus on that. And then we will deal with the enormity and all of the other things as they come. But focusing on zooming in and zooming out in the right moments is important for patients and family members.
And I think those practical applications are very helpful too. So I had a couple questions from leaders who are wondering how to sort of implement some of this on their team. One specifically speaking to how they can better delegate, or how maybe resilience will help them figure out the processes of things ahead of time, so it's not last minute. And then another one just saying, just having the energy to really help build this into their team. Like you spoke already about how to get it started, but is there specific advice for leaders that you could give?
Sure. So leaders, managers, thanks for joining and tuning in. When we think about your role, you have a very hard role because you're responsible for your own individual contributions. You're also responsible for leading, guiding others' contributions, and sort of the culture of the team. And so there's a lot of responsibility around this. A few ways to be able to integrate is, one, is incorporate resilience into every team meeting that you have moving forward. I know that I understand that UAB works with a company called MySpace or MyStrength. MySpace is different and very old, but MyStrength, Googlers actually have access to the same program, but there are some tools and resources there that you can pull out if you have all hands meetings every quarter or every month, just to have even 30 seconds or 60 or 90 seconds of, this month, we're going to focus on making sure that we add deep thinking time to our calendars. This month, this cycle, this whatever, hey, here's just a small highlight to be able to keep it in the forefront. The second thing for leaders is to understand, and Cabby has my presentation, and you're welcome to share any of the common language over that you would like on some of the text, but to think through, there are common languages and phrases that you can reinforce. resilience is about rest and recovery. Resilience is about relationships. Resilience is dynamic. It's ever changing. But most importantly, resilience happens by design, not by default. We have to be intentional with our actions. At the end of the day, as a leader, as a manager, you know this already, but I will say it for the sake of everyone listening. And for those listening, you're going to maybe reflect and be like, that's so true. I hope you say that. But we see what our leaders do before we ever hear what they say. We see how they role model these mentalities, these mindsets, and these behaviors before we ever hear them tell us what or how. And so for leaders in the room or in the audience, it's how you live. Do you have deep thinking time on your calendar? Do you take momentary breaks of rest and recovery throughout the day? Do you carry your team on those breaks? How do you take vacation time? Do you take vacation time? And then also for leaders to be visible around your actions. So for example, a VP at Google just recently sent out a note before he left. He said, I am going on vacation with my family for the next week. I will be offline and unavailable. I'm going to do this activity. This is what we'll be doing. I will return at this point. I encourage you to take your own time away as you need it. But then when he got back, he also sent the note back out to his entire org. And these are thousands. This is a very large org. And when he got back, he sent the note back out and said, hey, I went on vacation with my family. This is what we talked about. These are the experiences that we had. And I am back and feeling refreshed and ready to go. And these are my priorities for the next few weeks. And so as a leader, to be able to not just slide off on your vacation and disappear, but to invest in telling your people, I'm taking a break because it's important to me. And to be honest, if you're leaders, your people know when you need a break because of your language and your shortness and your attention span for them. So that's a very big part of it. So role model and lead by example. And then finally on the prioritization one, this is hard because priorities are ever changing. They're coming and going. They're constantly changing every day, every hour, every week. And the important thing here is don't just add on priorities to your team, but actively and visibly cross things off. And so whether that looks like a slide of that other company that you all use on your visual presentations, to be able to say, can you cross off? These are the things that we have deprioritized or removed from the list this quarter, or this cycle, this week, this month, depending on how frequently you meet. These are the new priorities. We will anchor the expectations around where we are together, but these we have removed and we have paused. And so it's okay to pause and even push deadlines out for things that are not quite important. And if as a team and as leaders, you're asking what's important now, very quickly you'll see which of those things are not very important right now and which things are urgent and important. So I realize we're at time. I want to be intentional with everyone. We've got 30 seconds maybe for you to catch your breath before your next meeting or wherever you're going next. So I'll toss it back to you all. Thank you again for having me. I very much enjoyed being here and it's an honor.
Lauren, it really was an honor and pleasure for us to have you. Thank you for taking time to share sincerely and answer some questions that are of practical import for all of our staff, our physicians, and our caregivers. We wish you all the best on all that you're doing in your personal and professional life. And we really want to continually to make clear to all the people on the call that wellness is a priority for the School of Medicine. And we're hoping to use some of the tools and techniques that you shared today, both personally as well as for our larger community. Thank you very much. And thanks to all of those who attended our grand rounds. I hope you'll tune in for our next grand rounds as well. Thank you again. Stay safe. Bye-bye.